Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. It's going to start my slideshow. So yes, I'm Jill. I'm from University of Surrey. I'm a professor of health services research and nursing at the University of Surrey, and I co-lead the workforce organisation and wellbeing theme at the University of Surrey. So I've got quite a bit of funded research at the moment, but it's not always the case. Research is often comes in peaks and troughs. I've recently completed an NIHR study looking at the implementation of freedom to speak up guardians and an evaluation of short centre rounds. And I've got quite a lot of projects at the moment, actually too many. I like to have 2 or 3 on the go. As you can see, there's rather a lot here. So doing a couple of realist reviews, looking at care under pressure for mental health in nurses, midwives and paramedics, unprofessional behaviours between staff review. Really fascinating study. We're just starting Good Sam, which is an app which 999 callers can use to take over a bystander's phone so they can see the trauma incident and work out what ambulances, etc., to send. That's I'm a co-applicant on that. Identifying the impact of colleague suicide on NHS staff, and then insulin delegation, melting the snowy white peaks, which is leadership for BAME groups in nursing, and then the impact of COVID on nurses. So there's a lot going on, and I think being a researcher who studies staff wellbeing, if any time was my time, I'm afraid the pandemic has been it. So I have been super busy, and what's great in my sort of role, I guess what I like about being a researcher is that autonomy and flexibility. Sometimes it causes me problems and undoes me, because this project was one that we just set up in the pandemic with colleagues from the RCM Research Society, and really trying to understand what was going on. So we did a survey, and we're starting a longitudinal study looking at the impact, and it's been one of the most powerful studies I've ever been involved in. It's been such an honour and privilege to hear nurses talk about some of the most difficult times in their lives. So that has been extraordinary, but we started it literally with no funding, and so doing pro bono work, which is a great privilege to be able to do, and I'm in that lucky position I can do it. As an early career researcher, you often can't do that, but it's been great to be able to just respond to need and do that work in a particularly challenging time. So who am I and what do I do? So I would describe myself as a nurse through and through. A colleague said, if you cut me open, there would be nurse written through me like a stick of rock. I consider myself a workforce researcher. I'm particularly interested in staff wellbeing and how to support nurses to care well. I am a principal and co-investigator, and I'm going to tell you my research journey, so you'll hear about when that happened. I'm on national committees, so I sit on the NIHR HS&DR committee, and that has been really, really helpful in terms of seeing what gets funded, what a good grant looks like. And I don't know if many of you know, but you can apply to be observers and sit in on committees. And certainly one of my early career researcher colleagues, who may even be in this webinar, did that, and I think found it really helpful in seeing how successful grants are written and the discussions that happen in the room. I also sit on CNO working teams, and am a part of an engagement involvement board for this institute, which, if you don't know it, is a fabulous organisation funded by the Health Foundation at the University of Cambridge, looking at quality improvement, and they have the most amazing website, so have a look. I'm a mixed method researcher, predominantly qualitative, and do realist work. I've been on national commissions. I'm an editorial board member. I have international visiting appointments. You can see me here talking at the Adelaide Convention Centre. I have a couple of visiting appointments in Australia. And I'm a mentor to many and a member of the Nurse Incubator Project, which I'll come back to. I've written over 100 papers, and £9 million I've brought in for 23 studies. And I say this not to kind of look, aren't I great? Definitely not doing that. I think people who know me would say that I'm actually quite modest, and I'm going to come back to issues around being imposter syndrome. But I say it to really say a bit about who I am and what I'm doing now, and that I feel very busy, but that I never imagined I'd be here. If you'd have told me 20 years ago when I started my career, I would be standing here now talking to you and putting up a slide like that, I would have just laughed and just thought that's ridiculous. So I guess it's really a sense of, if I can do this and get to this point, which feels, you know, perhaps a good point to be in a research career, then all of you can too. So I do it really to share and share my journey, and I'm going to get onto that in a moment. I noticed this was billed as sort of about clinical academics, and I kind of need to talk about the fact that I'm not a clinical academic, and I'm going to talk quite specifically about why I'm not later on. But my career beginnings, this is me with my dad at the back of the nurses' home at Addenbrooke's Hospital. And there was no research education in my training at all. It was very much state registered nurse, learn on the job, watch and do, an apprenticeship training really. So I spent most of my time in practice. I used to go out for blocks for education. I worked on a female medical ward post-qualification. I had no degree. I had quite good A levels and I could have done a degree, but I had the view then that nursing was very practical, and what did I need a degree for? How wrong was I? But I was curious and I did ask lots of questions. And I think for me, that's the hallmark of a researcher and somebody who wants to advance a career in research: being curious, having lots of questions, having puzzles, intellectual puzzles, why does this happen? And clinical questions and clinical puzzles. In my first couple of roles, I had two posts as a newly qualified nurse. I was doing my best to try and remain compassionate to patients and fit in with the team and give good care, but I found that very difficult, and I felt really unsupported actually in those posts, and probably a lot of my career after that stems from this period. But I felt very burnt out, and in my second post at Dulwich Hospital, I left nursing, and I thought I'd left nursing for good. And actually, it wasn't until I came to give my inaugural lecture, which you have to give when you become a professor, that I kind of put all this together, really. And I realised that the reason I was studying staff wellbeing, and that perhaps my master's had been about the experience of newly qualified nurses, was to do with my own journey. But I don't know why the penny took so many years or decades to drop, but it did. So this was my inaugural lecture. I was looking at care, compassion and ideals. And it was really then that I kind of made sense. And I think that's another sort of thing I want to share, really, that the idea that when you get to a position like me, you can sort of look back, or your CV looks all very coherent, and actually it so isn't. And actually sometimes you have to put some coherency on it and put some narrative on it. And as I say, it was only 8 years ago I managed to do that for myself. So don't despair, there is some narrative there. This again is me at Addenbrooke's. I don't know if you can spot me. I'm in the front row. There I am, sitting next to the teacher. Yeah, and I'm still in touch with those. A lot of these nurses. These in the middle row here. I talk to them quite regularly. So it was a bit of a bond for life going through that training. As I said, I then left nursing, and I think perhaps because I'd studied at Addenbrooke's in Cambridge and had quite lots of friends who were at the University of Cambridge, I probably got a bit of a chip on my shoulder and thought, I think I can do this. So I decided to leave nursing, as I said, and I went and studied history at UCL. Not the most linear journey for someone to get to be a professor of nursing, but a one I took. And I guess that's another thing. There was sort of, I wouldn't call this a bump in the road, but there are sort of ups and downs and little cul-de-sacs and places you go in your career that none of this was planned, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And I just sort of followed my heart. And luckily at that time, you could go and study history at UCL. And I was given a grant by the government and paid no fees, which sounds quite extraordinary now to say that. So I was very privileged. I then actually, when I was studying at UCL, I did, of course, I was a registered nurse. So I was pretty lucky in that I could do bank shifts and I could work to gain money. So I was probably one of the few in my cohort to leave without debts. And I actually then went traveling. And of course, nursing is an amazing thing to travel with, and you can go anywhere pretty much in the world. And this is the old women's hospital in Melbourne, Australia. There's a fancy new building now, but this is what it looked like when I was there. And I worked as a nurse and actually rediscovered my passion for nursing. I felt much more supported. I was given much more training. I was never left in charge. All the things that I had as a challenge when I was newly qualified were not happening here. And I kind of reconnected with nursing and thought, okay, maybe I haven't left nursing for good. And I didn't quite know what to do with the history degree either, if I'm honest. So I did reconnect with nursing. And then when I came back to the UK, I was away for 2 years. I came back to the UK and I saw a job advert it was only a 12-month post for a job with who's now Professor Sue Latter at the University of Southampton. But these two people, who was Professor Dame Jennifer Wilson Barnett and Professor Dame Jill MacLeod Clark. So to have landed in my first research job with two doyens of nursing research was pretty lucky. But I guess they were important role models for me. And they were great researchers. You know, they both had degrees and they've had PhDs, and I didn't actually, if I'm honest, I don't think I knew at that point one could get a PhD in nursing. So that was a great start. But I think I also worked hard. I didn't really know what I was doing. I hadn't done much research in my degree in my SRN training, as I said, and I hadn't done a dissertation actually in my undergraduate degree. So in terms of research, I was quite a novice, and I probably wouldn't get the job today actually as a research assistant, but I did then. And I learned on the job, and they were great teachers, and I kind of worked hard and picked things up quite quickly, I think, but I became a bit indispensable to them, which is always a good place to be. And so Jill in particular, the one on the right there, she kept me going in terms of fixed term contracts for the next kind of 10 years or so. And she was my master's supervisor and PhD supervisor. So that was an important relationship. Going back to these challenges of trying to maintain a clinical academic career, I think for my generation at least, and I hope it's very different for the new generation of nurses, it felt like it was one or the other. You were either in clinical practice or you were in research. I saw a different picture in Australia where they'd had all degree entry for quite a long time. But in the UK, I didn't see a pathway or a pattern to know how to do both. So when I became a researcher at King's, it pretty much felt like it closed the door on my clinical career. Also, I'd been a ward nurse. I wasn't a consultant nurse. I didn't have my own clinical patients. So it was quite hard to kind of maintain clinical practice. I wanted to generate research questions, but it was either or. I did later go back to practice to try and understand and inform my research, essentially as a workforce researcher, but I would not describe myself as a clinical academic. So the next 10 years at King's, I was a fixed term researcher, and I was a fixed term researcher for 19 years. So any of you are fixed term researchers, I feel and know your pain. I had 3 funded projects in that time. And I decided I needed to educate myself a bit more in research. So I did my master's at King's, which, as I said, was this transition from student to qualified nurse. I started my PhD and I became a mother. And I did have this desire to publish, and I just wanted to touch on that a little bit. So these are literally my first 2 papers, I think. That health promotional concept analysis, that was something I did in parts of my master's and then published it. And this Project 2000 was the second study. And I guess just a word about publishing. I think it can be hard. I think I heard a colleague describe being a researcher as someone having continual rejection. And I think sometimes it can feel like that. Not always, but you know, we get a lot of peer review, we get a lot of critique, and we get a lot of feedback. And whilst that's really helpful and improves things, I think it can be hard when you're starting out and picking yourself up and keeping going. And I think sometimes peer review can feel a bit like this. It's this idea that there's always one reviewer who's going to hate your paper or pull it to shreds. And that in this picture is reviewer 3. But we all have it, and I still have it. I had a paper rejected 2 days ago. So it's there for life, and it's not just because perhaps you're an early career researcher, this happens. I did then go to the University of Southampton to finish my PhD because Jill MacLeod Clark moved there, so I moved with her. And this is me getting my PhD with Jill and Sue, which was a great day. I did it part-time. I had my daughter in the middle. By the time my daughter was 4, she'd never known anything other than, she was my second child, never known anything other than me doing my project, as it was called in the family. So that was a great relief to finish. I carried on trying to publish, and I would encourage anyone to publish papers out of their PhD. It took me a while. I think I finished my PhD in 2004, and you'll see these are published in 2007. So that's a bit of a lag, and I wouldn't like that for my own PhD students now. But as you can see, I'm not a perfect scholar or perfect student. So in the next 7 years, as I said, I completed my PhD and I got funding for that. I did more fixed-term researcher studies. And then I got some postdoc funding and moved to the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And I know Shireen is there now, so I'm sure she can tell you a bit more about that. It's interesting how our paths are crossed. We were both at King's in the same time too. And what was great about going to LSHTM was it was a new disciplinary lens for me, and it was good to move institutions. So where I worked at LSHTM, it's a postgrad medical school. There was no nursing there particularly, although I did go there to work with Anne-Marie Rafferty. I had an opportunity to be a lecturer alongside my postdoc researcher funding. I made sure I got my PGCE while I was there. So I've constantly been trying to sort of educate myself, master's, PhD, fill in gaps in my CV. So it was great to be teaching there, get my PGCE. I didn't know where I was going to go after that. I pretty much knew I didn't want to keep being a fixed term researcher, but I didn't, I was filling in gaps. I worked full time at this time, and I did get the opportunity to undertake my first PhD supervisions. And then my postdoc was completed. And I went to, that's my postdoc. And then I went back to King's. So I've been at King's, I was at King's twice, 10 years both times. And this time I went to join the National Nursing Research Unit as Deputy Director. This was the team. And it felt like it was a big job. It felt like a much bigger job. I felt like I was kind of ready for a bigger job because my daughter was 8. But I was managing a team of 18 and that felt big. I got the opportunity to do much more policy work there, which was great. New opportunities to influence policy, to connect with the CNO's team, and really feel like your research was counting. In terms of getting funding, another opportunity for persistence. This was one of my first funded grants. After my postdoc, I got a project that was looking at the links between staff wellbeing and patient experiences of care. It was scary as hell, excuse the language, to pull together a team, put in a bid and then get it as PI. I found that very daunting and I learned a lot. I learned about how not to do it as well. This is a paper from that project, which has been widely cited. And I guess thinking about this research grant application process, it can feel another sort of daunting place and hard to get funding, and another place where there's perhaps lots of rejection. And I guess wanting to give another example of where persistence paid off. So for me, I have recently been awarded a Senior Investigator Award, an NIHR award, which I had to go for 3 times, 3 years in a row. And most people won't tell you this because it's all a bit secret and hush hush, and nobody wants to kind of out themselves as having had to go several times at this. But I don't mind, because I think sharing that, it makes it much more transparent and real, and makes us all not feel alone when we're rejected. So in year 1, I was told I wasn't doing enough for NIHR. In year 2, I was doing enough and I was very close, but it still wasn't funded. And in year 3, I was 3rd time lucky. The main difference, as far as I can see, is that I did start doing more for NIHR, but also I got lots more peer review and feedback. And that felt quite difficult because it was a very personal application. It was all about me. And I didn't actually want people looking at it, but I think it probably improved it significantly. And then I saw who else were senior investigators, and they were pretty much the whole membership of SAGE. And then I thought, oh my goodness, I don't know if I feel a peer. And then I sort of got massive imposter syndrome, which I did here too. So I was awarded an OBE for services to health and nursing. And I remember getting the letter. So you get a letter saying, we'd like to offer you an OBE, will you accept it? Because they don't want you to publicly turn it down. And I got that. And actually I burst into tears because 2 reasons. One, my mum was no longer alive, and it would have meant a great deal to her, and probably more to her than it did to me. And secondly, because I'm thinking, oh my God, I don't deserve this. There's loads more people who deserve this. Who am I to get this? Why have I got it? I questioned it massively, and I found it quite disrupting. It was a great day, and I decided I would accept it, even though it slightly jarred with my politics to some extent, but also I took it for nursing and for the team. And I very much wanted to share it with them. So it was a great day. I had a lovely day with my family, and I feel very privileged and honoured to be given that, but it was a strange time for me. So this idea of imposter syndrome that I think I've definitely had, and I think some of us can have on our careers, I think we all feel like an imposter sometimes, and that's okay. I mean, this pie chart is basically saying that's all of us. And I think the other thing is, you imagine you just know a little bit and everyone else knows way more. And I think the reality is you often know much more than you think. And that can be quite empowering to realise. I guess really my career planning wasn't there. It was a series of unplanned events. As I said, I was a fixed term researcher for 19 years. I felt like I did some treading water while my children were young, but taking these opportunities. I think the PhD definitely opened doors in academia, allowed me to develop as a PI and develop my own portfolio of research. Publishing for the PhD, important, as I've said. Gaining small pots of funding was important to development and bridge to bigger funding. That application for a bigger job in 2007 was big for me, and I had to feel that it was the right time. But when I became director in 2011, I had this real work-life balance difficulties. I was managing this big team, and I felt like I had no life outside of work for sometimes. So I did drop to part-time working in 2013. It's very invisible, my part-time working. It's 0.9, but I take that time across the year. And when I've shared this with other colleagues, I think particularly women, I think it's been a bit of a revelation that, oh my goodness, you can do that. And maybe that's what I like to do. And when I did that, I talked to lots of other women to see how they were managing work-life balance. I realized I wasn't being able to take time off when my children were off, and that's what I wanted. So that 10 weeks leave a year allowed me to be off with them. So to summarize, I'm not a clinical academic per se, but I'm an academic with strong links to clinical practice and staff experiences at work, particularly nurses. I think it's important to gain support, as I've said, these champions, role models, these opportunities, to move institutions and meet and gain more role models and support is really helpful. I think sometimes you need to move away from the institution, maybe where you did your PhD and masters, not to be seen as a perpetual student by others. My career hasn't been planned, as I've said, and I think what helped, hard work, definitely doing the best I could in all roles and posts and gaining support from others, so making myself a bit indispensable. Postgrad qualifications and experience of a range of projects and methodologies. So although I was a fixed term contract for 19 years, oh my goodness, was it a great research training. I got tons of experience. I've had fantastic colleagues and role models. I have not done this on my own. And there's definitely been some luck in here, but it's definitely a team effort, and many, many people have supported me along the way. And this is just a small collage of those people. So I just wanted to, last slide, briefly mention, I now want to give back and help others and early career researchers, and I'm part of the Nurse Incubator project, which is the Clinical Academic Research Careers Advisory Service, where we are support. I have one-to-one sessions with people, and that's run out of NIHR through Wessex. So just wanted to give a little plug for that, and I think there might be some people on this webinar from there. So thank you very much. Happy to take questions later.